Imagine buying a forgotten wooden house for $2, not 2,000. Two actual crumpled bills you could lose in the wash. Now picture a wildfire tearing through a luxury resort town, chewing up cabins with hot tubs and wraparound decks, and somehow skipping over that crooked little shack like it was invisible. Overnight, the joke becomes a jackpot. That's where this story starts. Right at the moment, a bad punchline turned into the most expensive headache of my life. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always blown away by how far these stories travel. The county tax auction smelled like mildew and old paper. A ceiling fan squeaked a rhythm you couldn't ignore. The clerk looked like she'd been stapled to that chair since the Reagan years. Parcel 9B, Cedar Hollow District, she said. No hands went up. On a dare to myself, I lifted my paddle. $2, she announced, bored out of her skull. The gavel ticked the desk. Sold. I paid with 2 bills from my pocket, signed the papers, and walked out grinning like I'd beaten a rigged carnival game. The house itself was more rumor than shelter. Roof sagged like a broken wing. Windows punched out decades ago. Porch boards screamed when you stepped on them. No power, no plumbing, no dignity. I told friends I'd bought kindling with an address, and for 6 months that's all it was. Bar chatter. I worked, traveled, paid bills, forgot I owned a building that sounded like a ghost when the wind hit it. Then the sky turned blood orange on the news. Reporters wore masks and stood in falling ash like it was snow. A lightning strike in the dry hills. Wind turned sparks into leaping animals. A day later, I drove up to see if my joke had already burned itself into a punchline. The hills were black. $1,000,000 cabins reduced to chimneys like gray teeth. The wedding lodge flattened. A playground melted into a twisted sculpture. And there, charred around the edges and half roofless but upright, stood my $2 house, stubborn as a mule. People started calling it the Miracle House. FEMA cones appeared. Insurance adjusters measured ghosts. The county declared a prime redevelopment zone around the ash fields, and like crows spotting a glint, developers swarmed. One waved $2 million. I laughed because it felt obscene. Another offered $5. Zillow spat out 10 like it was reading a lottery number. I patched a hole in the roof to keep the rain out and pretended this was normal. That's when she arrived. Sun hat, pastel blouse, sunglasses reflective enough to see my own doubt. Clipboard hugged to her chest like the 10 Commandments. She pointed at my hammer like it needed a permit. You can't do that without approval. I wiped sweat with the back of my hand and asked whose approval. Timber Pines, HOA, she said, chin angled like royalty. Annexed last May. I laughed. Cedar Hollow never had an HOA. Unincorporated, forgotten. I'd checked records myself. You'll be receiving notices, she said, and marched back down my drive with all the drama of a judge's robe. Monday morning, the first notice was stapled to my door. Unauthorized structure modifications. Fine. $2,750. Tuesday. Roof color non-compliant. Apparently my replacement shingles were a war crime. Wednesday. Unauthorized vehicle storage. That was my red truck on gravel. Friday. Failure to submit title for HOA review. That one felt like claws. By Sunday, my door looked like a corkboard for a very boring crime spree. This wasn't rule enforcement. It was erosion. Wear you down, paper by paper, until surrender feels like relief. They were building a fake record to fit a fake jurisdiction. I'd expected torches. Instead, I got letterhead. 6 months earlier, I'd set up trail cams along the tree line because looters happen, and developers get curious. 2 weeks into the notice parade, my phone buzzed at 2:07 a.m. Motion detected. I opened the app and froze. There she was, night vision ghost with a clipboard, flanked by 2 polo shirt guys. One rattled the shed lock. Another shined a flashlight through a window. She took notes the whole time like I was a specimen. I downloaded the footage and backed it up 3 different places. Next stop, county recorder's office. I asked for the annexation documents. The clerk slid 2 stacks across the counter, the filing and the official timestamp log. The dates didn't match. The filing was 3 weeks past the legal comment period. The signatures looked like they'd been photocopied through time. The clerk sucked his teeth. This isn't sloppy. This is deliberate, he said, and offered to certify the timestamps. Back home, the envelopes multiplied like mushrooms after rain. 500 here, 7,500 there, orange final notice banners like hazard tape. Then came the phone call from a voice as slick as a brand new briefcase. We're prepared to settle, he said. If you voluntarily transfer your title for review, we'll waive all fines. Translation: hand us your deed and we'll stop hitting you with paper bats. I called my cousin Paige, a municipal code officer in the next county, the kind of person who treats statutes like lyrics to her favorite song. She showed up in a city SUV, badge on her belt, sunglasses that said, "Please lie to me so I can enjoy my afternoon." We spread the evidence on my kitchen table, the forged map, the timestamp log, the trail cam footage, every notice. She didn't smile. They didn't overstep, she said. They crossed a felony line. That afternoon, a silver Lexus slid into my drive like it owned the gravel. She got out, heels finding the soft spots, lawyer at her shoulder, briefcase polished enough to pass as a mirror. They cited article numbers, threatened escalating fines, suggested amicable resolution. I used one word: warrant. They left, but the paper storm doubled. You don't expect a $2 joke to turn into a fistfight with a rulebook, but that's how a target feels when it realizes it's a target. The wind hissed through the pines. The house creaked like it was clearing its throat. I slept with the porch light on and my phone volume up, waiting for the next shoe to drop. It did, and it brought friends. We didn't fight quiet. We fought public. Paige walked into the county recorder's office like she was clocking in and requested every Timber Pines filing for the last 2 years. The clerk returned with a stack you could use for weight training. She spread the pages out and halfway down tapped the annexation map like she'd found a counterfeit bill. Filed 3 weeks late. Backdated. Signed by Karen. The clerk went pale, said the timestamps could be certified, and asked whether we'd need a sworn statement. Yes, Paige said. You will. We brought it to the town council. Normally those meetings are for potholes and library hours. That night, the chamber buzzed like a hive that had smelled smoke. Reporters lined the back with cameras that had seen more trials than weddings. When public comment opened, Paige took the mic and turned into a metronome of facts. Forged expansion into a conservation overlay. Trespass at 2:07 a.m. Recorded on surveillance. Backdated signature. Annexation outside the comment window. She held up the certified timestamp. People rose onto their toes to see. Then she clicked a remote and played the trail cam footage on the projector. Night vision Karen. Polo shirt duo. Shedlock jiggling like they were checking for ghosts. A wave of gasps rolled the room. Phones went up. Somewhere in the back, a man said what everyone was thinking. That's a crime. Karen stood with a smile that tried to push honey through clenched teeth. Politically motivated, she said. Community harmony requires standards. Paige didn't flinch. Standards don't beat state zoning law, she replied, and they don't turn late filings into early ones. The council president's gavel begged for quiet. When the vote came, they froze Timber Pines expansion on the spot and opened a formal investigation. The room erupted. She left like a storm cloud. The next morning, a thick envelope slid under my door. A cease and desist, accusing me of defamation and malicious obstruction of governance, asking for a retraction under threat of a $5 million lawsuit. I spilled coffee laughing and then stopped laughing. That's how bullies pay their rent, on fear. Paige snorted. They want to flip the narrative and bleed you with paperwork, she said. We'll bleed them with evidence. We called Deputy Daniel Ruiz. He showed up with a notebook he treated like a sacred text. He listened, wrote, watched the footage, and finally asked the only question that mattered. What's the payday? You don't forge maps and trespass at night just to collect fines. There had to be something under the paint. Answer knocked at dusk. A tall, stooped man with a leather briefcase that had outlived a couple of presidents. Name's Miles Harland, he said. Started Timber Pines back in the day. Heard what's happening. This isn't what we built. He opened the briefcase and produced the original charter, yellowed and annotated with neat, steady handwriting. See this clause? He asked, pointing to the line about expanding into conservation districts. It was struck through in red ink. We killed that in '98, he said. Too easy to abuse. They must have pulled an old draft and filed it as law. Paige's eyes lit with the tired joy of a cop who just found a clean fingerprint. We copied everything and took it to the district attorney. Enter Celeste Ontiveros, a prosecutor whose kind voice turns into a cutting instrument when aimed at lies. She turned the pages, listened to the 2:07 a.m. audio, studied the timestamps, examined the founder's notes. Fraud, falsification, attempted land seizure, she said. We're not keeping this local. We're opening it up. That night, an SUV idled at the end of my drive just long enough to leave a question mark in the gravel. In the morning, Paige found fresh survey flags along the North Ridge, bright plastic tabs like a trail for someone who preferred to work in the dark. She brushed dirt off a tag and frowned at the code. Western Terrain Dynamics, she said. Subsurface mapping. Then it clicked. This wasn't about lawns or roof colors. This was about what lay underground. Annex first. Fine and harass. Claim jurisdiction. Push environmental safety checks, roll in a contractor. Drill. The next council meeting felt like a trial where the whole town sat on the jury. Paige started with the forged map, the certified timestamp, the trail cam footage. Celeste followed with the money, HOA payments to shell companies, and onto contractors, and back to slush funds with friendly names. She laid out the contractor codes that matched the flags on my ridge. The story wrote itself as she spoke, an HOA fronting for an industrial play. Karen tried a last spin, safety reviews, best practices, community value. But then Miles stood with the original charter, the one with the strike-through line glowing like a flare. "We killed that clause 26 years ago," he said. The room exhaled like a mountain after a storm. The council suspended Timber Pines operations, froze accounts, and invited state oversight. Reporters ran into the night. Auditors dug. What they hauled up looked less like bookkeeping and more like confession. $400,000 diverted. Invoices for landscaping that never met a mower. Duplicate checks that matched like mirror twins. And meeting recordings where pressure tactics sounded as casual as weather. Residents found their voices. An elderly couple who didn't own a dog paid $6,000 in pet noise fines. A single mom was fined because a kiddie pool wasn't aesthetic. A retired mechanic's fence got non-compliant only after Karen used his property line to justify expansion. Deputies executed warrants and walked out with boxes, safes, drives, and a whiteboard photo the news couldn't stop running. Arrows from annex to enforce to acquire, underlined to lease, subsurface. Ruiz summarized it on my porch steps. This isn't an HOA story anymore. This is organized theft with neighborhood stationary arrests followed. Board members in cuffs. The lawyer too. Charges stacked. Forgery, wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, attempted annexation. Bail set in the stratosphere. Cameras caught it all. Neighbors watching from behind curtains. For about a week, the town slept lighter. Then, one morning, I found a note under my windshield wiper, weighted with a pebble the size of a lie. 2 words, stamped in block letters. Check the well. The well sat behind the house like a forgotten mouth, stones slick with time. I hadn't touched it since the day I bought the property. The grate should have screamed. It swung on oiled hinges like a door in a careful house. Someone had been here. Someone wanted me to look. I dropped a rope ladder and slid my flashlight beam down the throat. 20 feet below, something metallic winked from the stone ribs. A clean lockbox, wedged exactly where a pair of steady hands would put it if they wanted it found and not ruined. I climbed down, grit grinding into my palms, and pried it loose. On the porch, I cracked the latch and found folders, receipts, photos, a flash drive. The receipts bore the name that had already started sounding like a threat. Western Terrain Dynamics. Subsurface reconnaissance. Plot overlays with lines slicing across my lot like surgical incisions. A blueprint showing a pipeline footprint aimed straight through the heart of Cedar Hollow. The flash drive held an audio file that didn't need a narrator. Karen's voice, crisp and careless. "We'll push the claim through the HOA charter first. Once we secure the parcel, we authorize test drills. Nobody reads conservation contracts anymore. If the owner resists, we drown him in code violations until he sells." I drove the lockbox to Paige. She slipped on gloves, scanned the blueprints, and called Celeste. By morning, unmarked SUVs rolled up my gravel drive. An agent named Langley crouched next to a bright flag near the ridgeline, brushed away dirt, and revealed the tag code, WTD 3-AMPIERS. "Placed in the last 6 months," he said. They were waiting on annexation to justify Phase 1. Lithium, shale gas, maybe something else. Doesn't matter. The fraud does. Celeste's office lit up. Subpoenas flew. Western Terrain's offices were raided. Servers lifted. A memo leaked, someone accepting the forged annexation as sufficient cover to begin Phase 1 reconnaissance. The CEO resigned before the lunch hour could catch its breath. The town shed its shrug. This wasn't a fussy board protecting azalea hedges. This was a machine. The council called a special session. Homeowners filled every square foot. Reporters tested their mics. State folks stood along the back wall, faces like concrete. Paige laid out the forged map, the certified timestamps, my night footage, the lockbox receipts, the pipeline blueprint. Celeste traced the money like a detective telling a bedtime story no one wanted to hear. Dues to shell vendors, vendor payments to contractors, contractors donating to HOA projects that never existed. She used phrases like pattern of activity and predicate acts. It wasn't theater. It was a syllabus for what happens next. Karen tried to protest, but her supporters had melted. The founder raised the original charter, the red strike through the old clause glaring in fluorescent light. The council voted to dissolve Timber Pines pending state approval, freeze accounts, audit thoroughly, and refer charges up the ladder. People clapped like their hands were trying to tear the air. The intimidation, the drive-bys, the idling SUVs, those didn't vanish overnight. Tire tracks curled into the dirt near my shed. New flags appeared and disappeared like bad magic. Paige bagged every tag as evidence. Ruiz added each to the chain, tight as rope. Arraignment day arrived with gray clouds. Karen sat in a blazer the color of excuse. The judge read counts until the list felt like a staircase you climb, knowing there's no landing. Forgery, falsification, criminal conspiracy, embezzlement, wire fraud, attempted unlawful annexation, environmental crimes, racketeering. Bail was set where the air thins, cameras left hungry and satisfied. Meanwhile, the town wrote itself new rules. No HOA expansion without a 2/3 vote of affected owners and independent state review. Conservation overlays with bite. Public filings posted online with timestamps that actually mean time. Clipboards recalibrated. In the quiet that followed, I rebuilt. Reclaimed cedar shingles. A chimney that stands up straight. Wildflowers along the ridge where fire blackened the world. At the end of the drive, a sign carved by a local craftsman. Private land. Not under HOA jurisdiction. Not a threat. A fact. Cars still slow for the Miracle House. People still stare and point. I don't wave. I keep the light on. If they ask, I say this. One little house outlived a fire. Its survival lured greed out of the shadows. We didn't beat it with louder voices. We beat it with timestamps and footage and signatures that couldn't run. We beat it with a lockbox in a well that someone, with a conscience or a grudge, wanted found. The story didn't end with cuffs. It ended in a room where echoes carry, and every word gets written down. Celeste asked me to testify at the sentencing. I hate microphones. I hate rooms where coughs turn into events. But I love that house, and the people who paid fines for crimes they never committed, who got told to accept it. Be quiet, be compliant, be small. So I stood and told it plain. I bought a wooden house for $2. It was a joke. Then a wildfire turned it into a miracle, and that miracle turned valuable. People with clipboards came waving a rule book that looked official enough to make you doubt your own name. It wasn't about community. It was greed. When they couldn't steal it, they tried to bury me in paper. But paper burns. Truth doesn't. The room went as still as a pond at 6 in the morning. The judge had a ledger of damage and a stack of acts that spelled out a decade. He gave Karen 12 years and restitution to the neighbors, bled by fines that were never real. He barred her from any fiduciary role forever. The board members got lesser sentences, but lifetime bans. Timber Pines was dissolved. The accounts were seized to make victims whole. Outside, the mountain felt like it exhaled. On the courthouse steps, strangers shook hands like old friends. The retired mechanic clapped me on the shoulder and handed me a flask. To the guy who turned $2 into justice, it burned a line down my throat. It tasted like something that took too long and finally arrived. Back home, the porch stopped screaming and went back to creaking. Storms felt like weather again, not a message. No orange envelopes stuck to my door. No signs declaring my life under review. Just wind, stubborn wood, and the slow noise of repair. The house had survived fire, fraud, and fury. Now it got to be what houses are supposed to be, kept. The town learned too. New ordinances with simple math. No expansion without the people who live there saying yes. Independent eyes on every boundary line. Conservation overlays that actually conserve. Timestamps that can stand up in bright rooms. An HOA can still mow a lawn and keep the pool area neat, but it can't declare itself a shadow government and sell the ground out from under you. Sometimes I find myself on the porch at twilight, listening to cicadas, watching a road that still remembers tire tracks from nights when someone came to test if fear would make me fold. Fear did its best. Evidence did better. Timestamps, certified maps, trail cam video, founder testimony, receipts and blueprints in a lockbox at the bottom of a well. You don't have to shout when you can point. I keep the light on. I'm not inviting trouble. I'm telling the night it can see what it wants to see. Same house, same ridge, same person. The difference is, we don't pretend clipboards are crowns anymore. If you're dealing with your own version of this, people in polos acting like kings, here's what I learned. Save everything. Photos, dates, names, logs. Ask for certified copies. Don't let intimidation write your story. Get your facts in order and tell them in rooms where records are kept. Don't match their heat. Match them with truth that doesn't melt. Greed doesn't die. It changes costumes. Today it's an HOA. Tomorrow it's a committee or a task force with a nice logo. When it knocks, you don't have to be big. You just have to be steady, and you have to keep going. The house still stands. So do I. Tell me where you're watching from and the local time. If you've ever had your own HOA nightmare or any clipboard with too much confidence, drop it in the comments. And if you want more true stories, hit subscribe. Somehow, they keep getting wilder.